I'm going to ask some general questions that get them started, and then I'm hoping there will be space for them to kind of have some conversation amongst themselves that you all get to be part of, or you all get to listen in on. And then we'll kind of move through that. And then there should be some space towards the end that if any of you watching have questions, things you want to know more about, there will be space for you to ask that. And you're also able to use the chat. Please use the chat to ask your own questions, make comments, reflections, contributions, whatever's good for you. Having said that, I'm going to just open it up a little bit. So I want to know, to our peace builders here, who are you? Maybe who are you? Where are you? What initially got you passionate about peace building with Israel and Palestine? Um, and what does this look like for you now? Who are you? Why are you passionate about this? And what's the work look like for you right now? And I'll open it to whoever feels like starting.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's being so polite to each other.
I'll start. My name is Mercy Aiken, and I really got involved in this issue about 10 years ago is when it really became something that became just very big on my radar. And that was 10 years ago when there was another war, when Israel was bombing Gaza, if you remember, in the summer of 2014. And I had grown up feeling a very strong affinity and loyalty and like protective sense in my heart towards Israel, mainly because of the church spaces that I grew up in, where Israel was really kind of talked about almost through this rosy lens, like a little bit of this woo woo, like super spiritual, something really precious, something really special. And I felt that, then I read a book called Blood Brothers by Elias Shakur, a Palestinian priest in the Galilee, and that completely opened my mind and opened my heart to the reality of Palestinians and Palestinian Christians. That was in about 2004, so maybe that was kind of the beginning of when I began to expand my heart. 10 years later, 2014, the war is going on. And I'm thinking to myself, I need to say something on social media about this because my heart was really breaking for Gaza at that point. And and a lot of my friends were posting um, their loyalty to just one side and that they were praying for just one side. And I thought, really need to be praying for both sides. We really need to be praying for everybody. This was just my kind of initial thought. And so I posted something to that effect. But there was such a pushback of anger from many of my fellow Christians. I remember I posted something on Saturday night. I woke up Sunday morning. I'm getting ready for church, and there was just like this roar of disapproval towards me for daring to suggest that we should also be praying for people from Gaza. And it seemed so strange to me that this was coming from a Christian context, where at the very least, as Christians, we should want to be praying for anybody who's being bombed, even if they're our enemies. Like, this is sort of basic Christianity. And why are people responding with such outrage to my suggestion that we pray for people in Gaza? And it hooked me. The fact that I received such pushback is actually what initially hooked me onto this issue, because I felt like I had walked up to a big sleeping dragon and I had just lightly tapped it. And the thing had lifted up its head, looked in my face, and roared with fury. This was sort of the image that came to me. And I found myself thinking about Israel and Palestine all summer long, trying to understand it. That propelled me to go over there 1 year later. And I began volunteering at Bethlehem Bible College. And I volunteered there on and off between 2015 to 2020. And since 2020, when COVID hit, I've been living in the States, but working nonstop with organizations such as Peace Catalyst, Network of Evangelicals for the Middle East. I've been taking tours over there, writing books and just trying to expose people to the broader reality and a larger context than what I grew up with. I didn't have the privilege of growing up with a wider context, and I want to expose as many people as possible to the wider stories. So I feel like I've already talked too long, so I'm going to pass that question on now to someone else.
Well, so we're all friends, those of you who are watching us, and Carrie is my wife also, just so y'all know. And we've been sharing this space for a number of years. I'm an ordained minister, also teach adjunct at North Park Theological Seminary, a course on peacemaking in this context. Um, but my journey, so you would think, so I've been a pastor, I've been a missionary, and now I'm really focused on this issue, but as a part of a larger issue of how we walk in the world with Muslim peoples. I was a pastor when 9/11 occurred, and I was struck by how the church tragically mimicked much of the more conservative, kind of belligerent stance and posture towards Muslims in general. And I just felt I needed to kind of help begin to disciple and think Christianly of what it means just to be in the space and to be good neighbors and to love all people. In that journey, and I'll be brief here. I went to Jordan in 2007 to kind of learn from some mentors that we had met at a training, and they suggested you need to cross the Jordan River and go see what's happening in Israel-Palestine. So in 2007, a number of us we just randomly went, and this was my first visit to the Israel and Palestine, up to Jerusalem, and we went and sat down with Bashar Awad and Bethlehem Bible College and just began to learn a little bit more. I'd studied some, but it's very, very different. And what we encourage you at Peace Catalyst is that you um, receive the invitation by people in the Holy Land to come and see, so that you don't just um, form your opinions, form your thought of what peacemaking looks like remotely or from distance, but that you actually go and meet people. Well, I was doing that kind of through the back door, and I think one of the key things that struck me when we crossed the border, so the Allenby Bridge from Jordan into Israel, was the what I would say is the belligerent kind of harassment of Palestinian people at the border. So even Palestinians who live in Palestine were being mistreated or treated in very abusive and really ugly ways, just to get into their own country. So it created a bit of a problem, a really a crisis theologically, because I was thinking, how do I then now come into this space and think and behave and invite other people into the space of both understanding, and then how do we respond to the occupation, to the conflict. So through all of that, there's been a long journey of deep engagement. Carrie and I have been there a number of times for extended periods, up to 3 months. And this, we're passionate about this partly because we just feel that this is such a critical, pivotal time, but also a place in which the church often has just missed some of the larger issues, and we have not responded in ways that that I believe resemble the way in which Jesus would invite us to respond. I'll stop there. We'll share more later.
Carrie, why don't you go? It's
So I come to this as a layperson in 2014, 2015. I had been volunteering with World Vision, advocating for children in marginalized contexts. And through that process, I started meeting and volunteering locally in refugee resettlement, primarily with Syrian families that were coming to the Seattle area. And all of the ones that I met in that process were Muslim. And I grew up in a Christian context, I would say Christian culture. And I just didn't know what I didn't know. I was learning a lot. I was being confronted with some theology in my own spiritual formation that I hadn't really ever questioned. I had never really thought critically about it. And I started to see how some of that impacted had impacted the Syrian families that I was meeting. And so I kind of went through a crisis of my own around that time and realized that I needed to do better. I needed to learn more of the ways my faith impacted other people in other cultures and other ethnicities and contexts. And during that process, during that time, I met other volunteers who were Arab, and I learned at some point along the way they were Palestinian. And during some of those conversations, I learned that they were refugees themselves, and I had no idea, like, what is a Palestinian refugee? How are they made refugees? And I I felt so ignorant, and my friends were so gracious with me and helped me understand some of that. So I knew at that point I had a lot of unlearning to do and relearning. Also, I want to admit that, I felt a little angry about some of the narratives that I had learned growing up that were only partial narratives. And it took me a bit of time to realize, well, and acknowledge and affirm in my own journey that those may be mistaken or, I guess, deficient understandings. My response was out of love, compassion and love, and a place of trying to follow God to the best of my ability and conviction. And so one thing I've been learning is that people come to this conversation on Israel-Palestine based on the amount of information that they have had. And Christians typically come to this space with maybe picking a side or by default picking a side because of whatever they inherited in their church or faith journey. And I guess I want to challenge people like me who are now coming to this topic and realizing that maybe they don't have all of the facts or all of the history or full understanding, and also check that against all of the goodness of God, all of the centeredness of Jesus and the way of Jesus, because I think we've got to recenter and audit ourselves. And so I'm looking forward to more and more conversations with people who have had a similar journey. I think there's more people realizing that they're in this similar situation, and I'm hopeful that there will be more growth, more change.
Thanks, you all. It's great to hear your stories. We haven't heard each other's stories like that. And that Elias Shakur book, Blood Brothers, was impactful for me to read it early on. And just the picture of one microcosm through which to see what actually happened, because I was born 1961. We're swimming in a lot of, that's just a couple decades after the Holocaust, and we're swimming in that. I watched every Holocaust documentary and World War II documentary and viewed Israel's formation through that lens. And certainly as a Christian growing up, inherited a Christian faith, it's being able to just see, oh, that God blessed Israel, and then starting to have a heart for all nations, which is reading Genesis 12:1 and 2, not just the first part, which is I'll bless those who bless you, but through you, all nations will be blessed. And that's, we looked at upon America, we're blessed. We want to be a blessing on all nations. So we went overseas in Kazakhstan and worked with Uyghurs and, right before 9/11, and started to see, wow, there's a lot of hatred towards Muslims, and, in viewing all I need to know about Islam is I learned at 9/11, those types of phrases, and think, okay, those are the phrases that are in my community and that are swimming in, and then came back from Kazakhstan, and I knew that, and started connecting with Peace Catalyst and learning about the Prince of Peace and the Gospel of Peace, and I stood next to a guy yesterday on a corner who wasn't a Christian, but he was holding a sign, Matthew 5:9. And I was like, oh, and he, what, you're not a Christian? You're holding this scripture verse? And he goes, yeah, I want to challenge people that maybe are thinking about it. Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers. And he's a lawyer and done research. I was just intrigued. And that verse is always intriguing. What does peacemaking look like? And so 2015, around the same time of some of you, I said, we got to go to Israel and Palestine and find out, because I'm a hands-on learner, and said, why don't we do it as a family? Brought 6 of my kids, my son-in-law too, and my wife and I, we went there, and just as a listening pilgrimage, just to listen, see what's going on. Andy was helpful in just guiding that. Went with the Holy Land Trust and Samuel Watt and Bethlehem Bible College. We just listened to peacemakers, Jewish, Muslim, atheists, Christian peacemakers, and what their perspective was, and traveled around and listened to Christian Palestinians. So that was just really eye-opening. And they say, come and see, go and tell, so, but they invested and welcomed. And the next year I went with Rick Love. He's taught at Bethlehem Bible College, a peacemaking course, and met with more peacemakers there, Quakers and Ramallah, and, all sorts of folks. And I just felt like there was such an indebtedness, because I didn't like, what can I do? I saw such injustices and hardships, and kind of blew my mind of what actually happened. And instead of viewing it all through the trauma of the Holocaust and that they need a safe land, it's like, well, what's happening here? Is it unhealed trauma ends up traumatizing another person or passed on? And yeah, so that happened. And so when 9/11 happened, when October 7th happened, it's like, oh, okay, this is not just the lens we have to view it through. We have to view it through a larger lens. Than Kamala Harris the other day said, we have to have context. So I want to share about October 7th. And it's like, well, if that's the only context you're going to have, we're going to not come to any peacemaking perspectives that would help us. So that's kind of what's been inspiring me of late.
Thank you, David. Thank you all. All right. I'm appreciating the introduction. And yeah, y'all haven't heard each other's stories fully, for bits and pieces of it, and people have been plugging in a lot of different ways. All right. For these next few questions, Cari and Andy and David and Mercy, I'm going to ask one of you to start, and I want you to think about this as a fishbowl conversation. So we're not speaking to everyone else who's listening in. I want to invite you to speak to each other. So I'm going to ask one of you to start with a question, and then the rest of you can chime in and respond or push back or add on. But see this, y'all are spotlighted on the screen, so I know you can see each other. So talk to each other, yeah, and let that build. And I think that'll tends to bring up a lot of richness. For this next question, I want to name two contexts that matter a lot. First of all, as we are having this conversation about how do we do peace building in Israel and Palestine, we are doing this as a group here of white American middle class peace builders. That is the context we are coming from. None of us are Jewish, none of us are Arab, none of us live in the Middle East. Some of us have lived there for a time and we have experience there, some of us, but that's not our home. And it's important to note that a lot of the focus, for very good reason, for the past year has been on what's happening with the genocide in Gaza itself. And in the midst of that, there's been constant work of how is that bubbling over into the wider Middle East, and how is the context of what's happening in Gaza amplified what Israel is doing in the West Bank, and increasingly, especially this past week, the way things have escalated between Israel and Hezbollah, and how now there's a lot of concern about how is this going to continue to expand into a greater Middle East conflict. So naming those two as context, how are you all imagining what peace could look like? Like, it feels so far away and hard to imagine right now, but if there's any sort of vision that you are holding on to or trying to steer towards, or trying to encourage the church to steer towards. And the tag onto that, and this is as important, if not more important, as white American peace builders, who are you following? Who are you learning from? Who on the ground are you trying to be in solidarity with that's helping to teach you what peace does or could look like? And Mercy, I'm going to start with you. And then the rest of y'all can follow up on that.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Well, I just got back from the West Bank. I've had the privilege of going over there to Israel and Palestine twice during this war. So I was over there in April, May for Christ at the Checkpoint, where some of my colleagues here were also there. So I spent time in Bethlehem, and then I also spent about a week on the Israeli side. And then I just got back from another trip last month where we went and we visited hotspots throughout the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So definitely, I will just say right off the bat that the situation is so much worse in the West Bank than people have any idea, because it's so horrific in Gaza. What's happening in the West Bank pales in comparison, and it does. What's happening in Gaza has no parallel anywhere on Earth right now, and very few parallels historically to what's happening in Gaza. So it's kind of unprecedented. But that doesn't mean what's happening in the West Bank is not horrific, and the sense of this larger escalation, especially with what just happened in Lebanon with Hezbollah. And it feels to me like the sense that this Israeli extremist settler movement that is part of the Netanyahu coalition are trying to do as much as they can, as fast as they can right now, because they don't know how long they're going to be able to do as much as they can, as fast as they can. And so they're trying to take as much as they can. So in the West Bank, we just went to like one village after another that had been depopulated or was being forcibly depopulated by settler terrorism. Peoples who were being literally evicted from their homes, settlers just walking in and saying, out, holding guns, get out, evicting people. I don't need to go on and on with all of the details unless some of you guys here want to talk about that. But I think, to bring it back to your question, what does a future for peace look like? I think what is happening right now, in spite of how terrible it is, I feel like it's giving some Palestinians hope in this strange sort of way, because people are actually paying attention to Palestinians and what they're going through in a way that has not happened in the past. We met with Isa Amro in Hebron, and he said, before, our blood was just spilled and no one cared. Now our blood is being spilled, but at least people are watching because it's so much more blood. It says in Proverbs, the first one to plead his case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him. And I think in the West, we've just had like one narrative for so long that we've accepted as truth. It seemed right to us. We didn't hear any challenge, or if there was a challenge, it wasn't something that we took seriously. But I think with what is happening right now, forcing people to look, because it's hard to get away from it now. It's on, social media, it's in the news. Even if you're trying very hard to like cover your eyes and ears, even then you have to wrestle with these questions like, how ethical is it to pack, you know, 3,000 walkie-talkies with explosives, knowing they're going to be detonated, not having any idea who's going to be holding it when it detonates or where it's going to be detonated. Like, that's a big ethical question, I think, for the future of warfare, and how the ethics that we're going to live by on planet Earth, and what is acceptable and what is not. So, like other Palestinians and like Israelis who are also against the anti-occupation activists, I think they all collectively feel a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, in that the world is paying more attention and it's becoming less acceptable to just repeat tropes of the status quo that people know now have no bearing in historical reality, like it all started on October 7th. No, so many people know this is not true, that when someone spouts something like that now, they're not going to be taken very seriously, and I think that there's more of that is shifting. So for me, that is something that gives me a little bit of hope towards peace. And I will say, how does that give me hope towards peace? Because you can't heal a sickness that is not properly diagnosed. And for too long, this has not been properly diagnosed. And people we just need to get Arabs and Jews to play Frisbee together, and then everything will be okay. They'll realize each other are human and they'll love each other. Like if we could just get an orchestra together that all sings songs together, that would heal it. No, I mean, those things help. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad any effort like that is good. But it doesn't deal with this systematic injustice and the reality of what's actually happening on the ground. And I think that's what people can no longer hide from, is the reality. So now the real sickness is sort of being presented in front of us. And now it's like, okay, knowing what we know, how then are we going to work for peace? What is the right medicine that's needed here? So I feel uncomfortable starting off in a way, because I feel like I could talk forever and I want to leave room for others. So maybe I'll just stop right there. And if somebody wants to jump in on anything I just said or add to it.
Well, yeah, sorry. The part of the problem, and this parallels a little bit what Mercy is saying. So two things. Carrie and I have been in a lot of contexts, just even this last month, speaking in churches, preaching, teaching, and every room, I would say, is, if it's not full, there are way more people than there were just even a year ago before October 7th. And so I do think there's a heightened awareness, or people are leaning into it. Having said that, there's also the American tendency is to become exhausted and weary and walk away from it. So Peter, to your original question, we're all white, we're middle class, and I struggle with this even myself. So I've been exhausted, I've been depressed, I've been overwhelmed as I read the stories, as I hear from friends on the ground. And sometimes I just have to put it away, and I disengage for a while. But the sad part is that neither our Palestinian friends or our Jewish peacemaking friends can do that. It's an existential problem for them. some of our Palestinian friends have said, especially in the Bethlehem nexus, they fear when the phone rings. They don't know what the news is going to be, how many more family members they've lost that they're connected with in Gaza. So it's very, very heavy. But I think the invitation we would, all of us, extend to anybody listening is don't walk away. That is really a part of white privilege. We can walk away, we can pick it up, we can leave it, but we need to somehow pursue this. And then just the other thing that I also think is a sign of hope. We all learn. So the four of us here, we learn, and we are connected deeply to the thought leaders, the theologians, the thinkers in this context. And part of our job is to lift their voices, lift their insight into it. So Mitri Raheb is a very important thinker and someone that we all read. And he's making a very important critique that probably wasn't heard broadly enough before October 7th. And it's this. He said the Western Church provides theological software that supports the occupation and supports the death of Palestinians. He's a little more eloquent than me in the rephrasing of that. But we are part of the problem. So Peter, our thinking, our theological package has not been, as Cari talked about earlier, the word audit. We need to audit seriously how we even frame what is going on theologically. And to the degree that our theology is sustaining the conflict or supporting one side or does not see all of humanity equally, that needs to be rethought. It needs to be redone totally. So that's the challenge maybe that we bring to our listeners at this point.
I'll add, I was thinking about this first question and what does a future peace look like? I have this ideal, and then there's the reality. And Andy and I were talking about this yesterday. There's a part of Revelation that talks about the river that goes through the city, and there's the banks on each side. And in this middle of this river is this tree where the leaves on the tree are for the healing of the nations. And I've, for years now, have felt like the Jewish people of Israel and the Palestinians of the Holy Land and Palestine have this beautiful opportunity to be the example of shalom making, of being each other's healers, because they've both been through so much trauma. But I see that, and I have that hope and desire for that. And I see us as people who are trying to be peace builders that can be also the leaves on that tree to bridge those two separate parts. But then I see how our Western Christian culture and how Christian Zionism, I'll name that, has done the opposite. How we have contributed to the division and the polarization and the demonization, the dehumanization, instead of being the peacemakers and following Jesus' example in how to do that. And I think what that looks like in the future is partly dependent on how the church in the West responds, and whether we take an honest look at our own theology, our racism, our Islamophobia, the things that contribute to valuing loves some lives differently than others, and then decide whether we're going to. The word repent sounds like we're going to shame everyone, but I don't see it that way. I see it as an opportunity to change and be liberated ourselves from this bondage of violence, and allowing that allowing ourselves to be separated from God, from the love of God, and stopping that flow of love from going out of our own hearts and physically, tangibly out to the world. And so if we don't change, if we don't do that, if we don't call ourselves back to the center of what it means to follow Jesus, because we have such influence there, because we're funding and supplying arms to this genocide and to this into the conflict in general and within the Middle East, it's going to be dependent on that. I really do believe that.
Yeah, it's kind of like that story, and the Sunday school teacher asks her young kids, what has a bushy tail, is gray, and likes to gather nuts. And the little kid says, I think I know the answer, but it's a squirrel, but I think it's supposed to be Jesus. It's like everything goes back to Jesus. And in this realm of what brings me hope for a future and whose voices we center, listening to the Palestinian Christians in their perspective, they're about nonviolence, they're about mutual flourishing, mutual liberation. If we can center their voices, at least for our communities, and amplify them, as we have mentioned already, follow a podcast called Across the Divides, Palestinian Christians, kind of birthed out of Christ at the Checkpoint conferences. And what they're saying, and I think they're going to be a vital part of what negotiations happen in the future. Not that we value Christian lives over Muslim or atheist lives or anything like that, but they're an important part of the Holy Land. So that gives me hope that I think they're like the 5th biggest employer in West Bank, and they're respected. They love their communities together, not just within Christians, across communities. Israel's tried to make it look Christians are leaving because they're being persecuted by Muslims, and it's more the occupation. So those things give me hope that they're going to be there, and that they're called to say, as we see a genocide live stream before us, voices like Munter Isaac, who are respected cross faiths, cross Munter's sermons and messages, whether it be,
Yeah.
Those types of things are helpful to me to see that they are being converged with people who are caring about militarism, economic injustices, gender equality, climate change, and all of the mask is coming down, the curtains being drawn on the Wizard of Oz of something's not right here, and in all these broken aspects and fissures that are going through the world. And so I'm hopeful that 3.5%, that they say if you get 3.5% of the population working something nonviolently, it can change the world. So that gives me hope. And these Palestinians have been doing this for decades, so they're going to teach us how to continue to sustain this. And it's not going to be just a little blip in our attention span, which it has been in the past, but hopefully they'll keep leading the way, center their voices.
David, I just want to say a little anecdote. We're friends with a family in Hebron. Hebron is majority Palestinian, very Muslim conservative city. And one of our good friends there, a Muslim brother, right after, stuff really started, going south on October 7th, he reached out to me and he wanted to connect with Munther. And so we need to dispel that illusion. You made reference to it, that it's the Muslims that are persecuting the Christians. That may happen someplace, but it hasn't been our experience. And in fact, they're becoming allies. They're becoming allies for peace with justice, and speaking as two monotheistic religions that are deeply invested in this. And also some of our Jewish friends are deeply invested in peace.
Yeah.
Yes. That's actually what I just wanted to jump in. I think we all want to jump in now. But I just wanted to also mention, for those who aren't aware, maybe who are listening, but there are many, many groups that are working together, like A Land for All. There's different organizations that are composed of Israeli Jews, Palestinian Muslims, Christians. They're working together, envisioning a land in which there is equality for everybody under the same law. It could take different forms. There's lots of different ideas and plans that have been floated. A really good book is by Jonathan Kutab called Beyond the Two-State Solution, that will just kind of get your mind thinking outside the box. Because the reality is there's not going to be a two-state solution, regardless of what Kamala Harris or anybody else says, without completely overturning, uprooting hundreds of thousands of Israeli lives in the West Bank now, with their own cemeteries and everything. It's just not going to happen. Like, we have to look at a way now in which everybody can live in the land in equality, a nice democratic Western value. I think that everybody should be able to get behind, certainly a Christian value, that everybody's treated equally under the same law and no one gets favoritism or pushed down because of their race or their ethnicity or their religion. So and there's so many people who are working towards this. So I just wanted to throw that out, that if we really want to help for peace, joining our forces with these organizations that are prophetically envisioning a better future, I think is one of the best things that we can do. And there is a lot of hope out there. Like what you were saying, Cari, some of like the Holy Land, it could be so beautiful. Like I get glimmers of this all the time. I feel like that land has brought out just the most incredible humanity in people that I've seen, whether Christian, Muslim, or Jew, that I'm just like astounded by the depth of formation of just humility and patience and empathy and long suffering and like not giving up, decade after decade, and speaking, with strength and courage, the truth, while still holding their heart open in a conciliatory posture to those who oppose. It's incredible. It's incredible. And if these people were leading, I think Israel-Palestine would be one of the most dynamic, beautiful places on earth. And so that really gives me hope. I could list a whole lot of names of other people to recommend, but maybe I'll just put them in the chat so Cari can jump in.
Well, I wanted to echo what David was saying too. And I didn't get to didn't say what's also been on my heart about that idea of the West, Western Christians kind of repenting. Part of that is humility and learning from people who are in those contexts, who are directly affected by that and who have the wisdom to share with us, because they've been living it for almost 100 years. They've been trying to figure out how to survive within that context and how to work nonviolently. And to be honest, I don't think we're very good at that. It hasn't really been developed well in our culture and our society. And so we have a lot to learn. And part of that is really being humble and realizing that we aren't going to be the ones that come up with those answers necessarily. We might learn those from Me Too Rahab, from Munther Isak, from, you know, from Jewish Voice for Peace, you know, folks who are really working even within their own sense of privilege and trauma. You know, they've got a history of both. And listening to their voices and learning from them is really a critical part of that process.
Yeah.
All right, I want to jump in and ask another question that's building off of several things y'all have already started to touch on. It's gonna take me a moment to build the question exactly, and I would love to invite you to disagree with each other on this. I know you've had different forms of conversations in the past, and I think that makes it kind of fun and insightful for the church. But as we're thinking about, so we've seen, particularly in America and in the church, a wide range of responses to what's been happening over the past year. A lot of the church, particularly evangelical church, just right off the bat, sides with Israel and supports Israel in whatever they do, and isn't even aware of or listening to other narratives. Quite a bit of the church is just apathetic. It's something that's happening way over there. We don't talk about politics. We don't talk about, they don't talk about some things in their churches, and they're just not paying very much attention to it, or it's so overwhelming and heartbreaking that they can't deal with it. There are plenty of Christians that are tied to Mercy had mentioned this earlier. It's like, well, we just need to find ways to talk to each other and do things together. We need choirs, we need football tournaments, we need to interact, or they need to interact. And there needs to be more shared understanding and bridge building. And there have been people who have been working at that for decades. And there's, especially in the past year, but before that also, there's been a much increased interest in direct action, in protesting, in disrupting the status quo. And taking a more aggressive, more assertive approach to wanting to address what's happening, at least in the immediate. So as you're thinking about that, that's all the context. So as you're thinking about where you're plugging in and your friends and your networks, and particularly what do you want to invite the church to do to find their own place in this? What advice do you have for the church? What do you want to call them into? What do you want to challenge them to think of or try out or learn about? And how do you want to help them navigate the different ways to get involved? How do they navigate the tension between whose narrative, Palestinian, Jewish, and all the sub narratives? It's not like it's just one or the other, all the narratives mix that. How do they decide who's to prioritize and how to balance? Should they balance? Should they just pick a side and go with it? What's that look like for y'all? And jump to
Well,
Andy first, because he unmuted.
Many of our friends, in fact, some of our early tours, they really, in fact, one of our colleagues, May Cannon, she kind of captured a thought that I think is so important. She said, "Don't pick a side." She's kind of quoting some of the Palestinian people who would guide tours. So when Christian groups or churches go over, don't pick a side. Because when you pick a side, it changes the whole thing. But really listen, and I think this is the challenge, that there's a hole in people's understanding, so they need to listen to a narrative that they haven't listened to before. And I think that has to be a starting point for anybody in this. Our Palestinian Christian friends, which I think are a vital piece, they feel invisible, they feel unheard, they feel marginalized in Western Christian circles. There's been invitations to come speak at conferences, and then when they find out who they are, they're uninvited. So that needs to change. I think that's the first thing. But let me make this open to my other three friends here, because I'm sure there's thoughts that are coming here and answer your question. I don't want to take all the space. Who's next?
think we're all waiting for each other. Like, I don't want to keep being the one to jump in. Do one of you guys have something burning that you want to say? I mean, I have a lot I could say, but I don't.
Yeah, I guess people are at different places. So just if it's your congregation's not ready or a community is not ready, then it's the education aspect of hearing from Jewish Voices for Peace, or having them come in and do a documentary in your church, and they're happy to have a conversation afterwards with their bringing their faith, and they're frustrated that it's been weaponized to do what it's doing. And because you can't be anti-Semitic by listening to our Jewish friends. If people are already energized and want to do it, getting the slaughter to stop is the first priority. It's when people say it's complex and two-state, one-state things. Well, the genocide's not complex. Don't let anybody say it's complex. We are seeing our kids being amputated without anesthesia and all this. We're seeing this happen. It's not complex of what to stop. Just heard this last week. Israel used up all its ammunition in the first 4 or 5 weeks of its bombardment and carpet bombing of Gaza. They did that because they knew the world wasn't going to allow them to continue beyond 4 or 5 weeks. So they used up all their ammunitions. Yet America came and said, we'll resupply you. And we've been resupplying ever since. So we're complicit with it. And if anybody's energized, I just put in a chat, we have to call Bernie Sanders, or having this campaign to stop resourcing. We're breaking the international law. And so in the chat, if you want to call, this is really a crucial time for those that are motivated. But for those that are still wanting to find out the complexities, it is complex of what that will actually look like, but it's not complex of what to stop right now. That's where I'm stopped.
Thanks, David. I want to just highlight a couple of things that David said that I think is part of this conversation. And so, David, I hear you saying that the top priority right now needs to be stop the genocide, stop the violence. We can't deal with all this other stuff until that happens. And as I hear you naming resources for doing that, like even you mentioned what anti-Semitism is. And in America, like that is a stopping point for some people, because there are different definitions of what is anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And you mentioned bringing in resources from Jewish Voices for Peace, which many of us love and love to do stuff with them. And there are some people who see them as so far to one side that they're afraid to bring them into their church. I think I'm just highlighting that in the complexity of how does the church figure out how to navigate this and get to this point of what is the most urgent thing that you've named. So that's not pushing back. I think I would like to name the context of what's happening.
You guys can add some more, but my gospel track, I've always had the gift of evangelism. My gospel track on this is watch the documentary 1948, Creation and Catastrophe. Whoever likes history, whoever wants to hear both sides. If you want to do a both sidesism, they're interviewing people that were part of 1948, both Israeli combatants and and Palestinians. And that also opens the eyes. It's just history. It's not, and we've been told a history that's not been accurate. So that causes me, that opened my eyes to like, what else have I been not brainwashed or propagandized or whatever? 1948, I'll put it in the chat too.
I think we can also lean into our own convictions and what we know to be true. We know that violence begets violence. We know that carpet bombing civilians is wrong, and we need to be able to be confident enough in that as Christians, as followers of Jesus, to stand up and say something, regardless of whether someone says it's anti-Semitic or not, and find those resources that can join your voice with that, because there's plenty of Jewish voices that are saying, number one, this is not Judaism in practice. This is not making us safer as Jewish people. It's actually making Israel and other Jews around the world less safe and risking violence against them. And we need to be able to be willing to accept pushback and be prepared for that and accept the cost. Because Jesus didn't say this would be easy. And obviously it's not easy, but we have to speak up. And so for churches, if you're, step one is realizing that you do have a partial narrative, like we've all been saying. Be committed to learning and unlearning. And also, while you are doing that work that we're called to do, and to also then step into those spaces and speak out. Mercy, I know you've got a lot you can add to that.
Well, my mind's just exploding like so many different directions, but I read something a few days ago about genocide, and how the point that was made was genocide happens when people are silent and when they tolerate it, and they happen in increments. Like, we're going to go this far, and is anyone going to stop us? No. Okay, we're going to go this far. And so the silence of the church of the world is what enables any type of genocide to go on anywhere, especially with what we see happening right now. I mean, it's happening right now as we're speaking. How many people are being killed, in the Middle East as we're even speaking? They're enabled by silence, and it keeps pushing the envelope of what is acceptable until anything is acceptable. So just back to your point, Cari, about being willing to speak up, we have to be willing to speak up. When there's a genocide on the line, like our silence, maybe we're trying to hold a posture of, I don't want to be divisive in my church. This is kind of what I hear a lot. Like, we don't want to be divisive in our community. There's already enough polarization. There's already enough divisiveness. But the truth is, if we don't get to the heart of what is, to go back to the analogy of what is sick, like if we can't diagnose properly what is actually making this polarization or this separation to begin with, nothing is going to be healed. Like, we have to go to the root of the problem. We have to use a holistic perspective that cares for everyone and that goes to the root of the problem. So for churches, I would just say, begin to think with your heart and to take responsibility and also hold hope. I think that if we can do those three things, we can begin to move into a posture of peacemaking. If we're moving with compassion, if we're taking responsibility for the part that we have done, and if we can hold hope for the future. I hear a lot of people expressing hopelessness, like it's intractable, or it's too complicated, or it's always been this way, or nothing's going to get fixed, or whatever. But I think, with all due respect, that those are cop-outs. We have to engage now. And I really almost feel like the Holy Spirit is forcing us to engage. Like, this has gone on for decades now with the complicity of the church, and we're being forced to a place where we have to deal with our silence, our complicity, our theology that is enabled it. These are important questions that as we begin to deal with them, it will be a repentance for the church or a cleansing for the church. It will be a healing for us. It will be a way to ground us back into the simplicity and beauty of the gospel in a way that I think we as Christians want to see. I kind of jumped all over the place. I'm sorry about that.
No
But
worries, no worries.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I feel like with this genocide that is going on in Gaza, like I'm so
Hmm.
worried about them. I'm so worried about the people in Lebanon, and I'm really also very worried about the Israelis too. I'm worried about them. I don't want to see them destroyed. I want to see everybody there live and flourish. And I was just thinking recently, I remember Netanyahu said a few years ago that we will always live by the sword.
Hmm.
That's that he said. And you know what Jesus said about that? If you live by the sword, you will die by the sword. And I mean, it was almost like he was speaking a death sentence
Yeah.
over his people by saying, we are always going to live by the sword. That's a tragic fate for Israelis. It's a tragic repercussions that hit Jewish people everywhere. When you're like destroying another people, as the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. They're destroying a people. If you're doing that, there's no way that you can do that and not destroy yourself too.
Exactly. Yeah.
And and
Hmm.
my heart breaks for that. It does not have to be this way. And if we want to be good friends to
Hmm.
everybody over there,
Hmm.
we have to recognize this and not
Hmm.
keep supporting Israel on this suicidal death, spiral that it's going in, and by trying to inflict it upon the Palestinians, not just Israel and Palestine, the region too. So I believe it's anti-Semitic. It's more anti-Semitic from my perspective to just say, I'm going to stand and applaud for Netanyahu, everything he says, because
Hmm.
it's easier for me. That doesn't cost me a thing. And maybe I get even some, uh, I get perks for doing that. That to me is far more anti-Semitic than speaking the truth in love
Yeah.
and advocate recognizing that these people are inextricably intertwined now. And not one of them, if they go down, they're both going to go down, or if they rise, they will both rise. We have to help them both rise.
So so it's not just our individual conscience, but there is, and I'm observing this. So Karen and I have been involved in more street protests, public spaces, federal building. We were at a memorial service last week, or now it's 2 weeks ago, for the young woman that was shot and killed outside of
Aisha.
Jenin, American
Mhm.
from Seattle area. And there was a impromptu, or excuse me, it was planned, but it was very quick, a memorial service on Alki Beach, which is a coastline here in Seattle. There were over 1,000 young people there. And I do feel that there's this broadening collective consciousness towards what is happening. And if we miss that, if we're not in those spaces, if we are unable to read really the sense on the street, it discredits. If you're a church person, if you're just even as a human being, and you're not seeing this, and you're not standing up and doing something and speaking out, um, you, you you're less and less viable. You're seen as an entity, as a group of people with less integrity, more and more. That's just growing, and there's no way that um, we would survive that. So it's for everybody there, but it's our collective consciousness that is being challenged right now.
All right, I want to jump in here as much as I would love to let this go for another hour, because now I can see your hearts coming out in this, and it's beautiful. But with 15 minutes left, I also want to leave space for other people to ask questions.
Mm.
So for the four of you, I would like to invite you, if there are specific resources or opportunities or something you would want to invite people to get involved in, check this out. Follow these people. We put some links in the chat already. Here's an action coming up. Here's a movement to pay attention to.
Mm.
If you have a specific call to action that you want to share with people, go ahead and put them in the chat yourself. And Nicole is going to send a follow-up email after this, which will include all the links and stuff we have in the chat. So that will also go out. And as you're doing that, for those of you who have been listening in, what are you wondering? What do you want to know about? I invite you to either put your questions in the chat, or you can just unmute and ask them. If you know how to raise your hand on Zoom, that's great. You can do that and I'll call on you. If you don't, you can just unmute it.
So you want us to just put stuff in the
Yeah.
chat, Peter, or
Yes, if you have a call to action, go ahead and put it in the chat.
Ah.
Just so that it gets preserved and shared later.
Well, I saw somewhere in the chat, and I think Carrie might have mentioned it. Movies are powerful. They are kind of the second best thing to actually going and being in on a tour and meeting people. We've seen, and we're gonna now start screening Where Olive Trees Weep. So this was done in 23, actually before October 7th, but it centers the trauma of both sides and kind of the story, and it kind of tells the story of people in the space, and it's quite powerful. There's yeah, just some important things that can be. I'd highly recommend that. So it's the educational piece.
Yeah. I'll jump in and add that another organization I work with, Network of Evangelicals for the Middle East, we're going to have a forum. This is kind of something new. It'll be a gathering in Montecito, California, December 6th, 7th, and 8th. And we're going to have some of the speakers that we've mentioned here. And if you're someone who comes from a place that's more like evangelical or theologically predisposed towards one view, you want to wrestle with the scriptures, or you want to pray, or you want to meet others of like mind, please consider coming to this forum. It'll be in Montecito, California in December. And you may also want to think about, we're going to be putting together a trip to the Holy Land next summer. Some of us here will be co-leading it together, inshallah, God willing. So if you'd like to come and meet some of these people and see the reality on the ground, I would just like to invite you to begin thinking about that. It'll probably be in July.
And if I could add to that, just Mercy just got back from one of these accompaniment trips or international, and they are doing continued trips like that through this fall. There's one coming in October 13th. I'm considering going just to when international groups are there in the West Bank. The violence is a lot less likely to happen for our Palestinian friends. So we've done some of that. I was at Tented Nations for a week, and they are the Palestinians are so grateful because they know that without that, they've already been beaten up and burned, their trees burned and stuff. But without that presence, it's a lot more likely to happen. So there's, Mercy she has a great podcast. Maybe you could put that your interview podcast about that into the chat, because that would be a great resource for people to know about that, because there's more coming up this fall. And there even talk about doing a longer term thing after this ceasefire ever happens.
So I would like to mention also, Carrie and I have a Substack, but I think we both prefer, maybe Carrie, Mercy's Substack.
Wow.
Mercy's just a great storyteller and a communicator, and she's from her recent trip, she's just got some really, really great stories. And you should follow what she says on Facebook, but her Substack is a curated list of very important stories. She centers the stories of the people, and it's just powerful stuff. Karen and I do a little bit of that as well, so follow us on Substack.
I also want to add to that. One of the things that we can't forget too is that there are a lot of people that have been impacted by this genocide and who have somehow managed to get out of Gaza. You can help directly organizations that are in Gaza, but also the families that have come out and been evacuated for medical treatment. PCI had a team of people that was working also with some other folks who helped evacuate a little girl named Lulu and her family out of Gaza to Cairo with a critical heart condition. And this team was through the Isla project, which has been founded out of this, has helped 2 other families get out of Gaza who have children with critical heart conditions. And I know that there's a lot of different organizations and groups that are doing similar stuff. I know Mercy has been directly involved with some of that too. Wherever you can, whether if you can't give yourself financially, share some of those organizations, some of those links, direct asks through, Messenger to help some of these families, because, just making a difference in one family, one child, one life can have just eternal and long-term impact.
Yeah.
That's something we can do.
I'll just piggyback off of that real quick, but I have a project that I'm working on with a refugee from Gaza. Her name is Sahar al-Sayegh. I share about her in my blog. And she's rounded up a lot of these other women who are refugees from Gaza who are living in Cairo. And they're doing like just a startup with their own tatriz, which is the full traditional Palestinian embroidery. So if you'd like to help support that project, you'll be directly helping to support these refugees who have nothing, just make ends meet while they're living in Cairo as refugees, sometimes with big medical bills. So if you're interested in buying some tatriz for like Christmas presents, please contact me. I'll have some very, very soon to help support these women.
Thank you all. Okay, we have about 9 or 10 minutes left. I'm going to leave space for whatever other questions people have. And again, all those links and information will get sent out as well. First one I see in the chat, Mercy, for you. You've met the Kasaya family. Can you share more about them?
Yeah, the Kasaya family. I mentioned I wrote a blog also about my interaction meeting them just in August right after they had been evicted from their house. But I knew about them years ago when they had this big restaurant right outside of Bethlehem. The restaurant was demolished in the summer of 2019. And that was when we were first getting the feeling that the Israelis were going to take like this Machrur Valley, the last green space left in Bethlehem. And a lot of people, not just the Machrur restaurant, but a friend of mine at the Bible college who had a home that she and her husband were building to retire down in one of the valleys nearby. It was also demolished by the Israelis that summer. I have to remind you that when your home or whatever gets demolished, the Israelis charge you for the cost of the demolition of your structure, in addition to the loss of your structure. So yeah, we met with Alice. There's a lot, they were forcibly evicted from their home on July 31st, and they've not been allowed back, even though they've tried. They've been arrested as they've tried to just go back to their home. There's a global call to prayer on September 29th for the Machrur, Save the Machrur Valley, that's kind of being spearheaded by Alice Kusia. So I don't know what other type of question in particular that someone might have about it, but I would say you can follow them on Facebook. I don't know if it's under Alice Kusia or Save Al Machrur. But find them on Instagram and follow, because you can stay in touch with what they're doing with this movement that they're building around to save this last green space in Bethlehem. The Kusia family is just kind of at the tip of the spear with this whole thing, with their very visible demolition of their restaurant and then being evicted from their house. But there's a lot of other Palestinians that are living in this area who will also suffer the same fate. So what they're fighting for, kind of like with the Nassar family and their Tent of Nations farm, it's the same thing. If that
Mhm.
folds, there's going to be a lot of other people that fold. So we need to support the ones who are visibly engaging in these struggles to hold on to their land, which would be another thing I would just thank you for putting that in the
Mhm.
chat.
Thank you, Donnelly. All right, you, Mercy.
Mhm.
Another question. How accessible is it to visit the West Bank right now? Or how accessible is it to visit the West Bank for non-Americans?
It's accessible. I mean, I was just there a few weeks ago. A bunch of us were there earlier this summer. You can still get in. I would suggest, though, flying into Jordan and then crossing at Allenby, only because so many flights are being canceled in and out from Tel Aviv. Or you can take a chance doing that. But as things heat up, it's easier and safer, I think, to fly into Jordan because less likely to have the flight canceled. You can still get in, though. Nothing, nothing is being stopped.
Mhm.
Just don't see very many, you don't see very many foreigners around there, which is another reason I will put a plug in to go if you can right now because
Yeah.
they need the support.
So recognizing when y'all have gone, you're going as Americans on American passports. Have you seen any difference between Americans trying to get in versus people from other countries, non-Americans?
I do think because we have a visa waiver program with Israel as Americans, we're gonna and they just signed it like a year ago or something.
Mhm.
So you know, I forget what the percentage is, but it's very high of Israelis have to be allowed into the United States, but they have to reciprocate and
Mhm.
allow the same amount of Americans in. So they can't be as picky at the border, which they used to turn away a lot of Palestinian Americans. They would even turn away Americans who they thought were activists. Now they're kind of letting everyone through. But I see Donnelly is in here and she'll know very well. We had some friends from South Africa who tried to come in,
Mhm.
and they were turned away at the Allenby border. Two very beautiful Christian women who wanted nothing more than just to come in solidarity and with hearts of love. They
And
were
that
turned
was just in May.
That was in May.
Yeah.
So if you're an American citizen, you have a different privilege here. I don't know how long it will last, but we have it right now, where it's still easy for Americans to get in, easier than it's ever been, actually, because of this visa waiver program.
But with Palestinian descent, who knows? Can we could connect you with somebody that's like Omar or others that could tell you if you have individual questions to contact him, because with Palestinian descent, does that make any difference, Mercy? If you
It's easier now.
Yeah.
Like I was talking with Jonathan Kutab, I've talked with other Palestinian Americans about it. It's easier for them than it's ever been. You just
But
go. Now,
but
as this war is ratcheting up, this may
yeah.
change, which is another reason I would suggest if you feel a stirring in your heart to be part of one of these solidarity visits before this year is out. There's two more scheduled, one for November and one for December. If you feel a stirring to think about that, pray about that, I would say do so and strike while the iron's hot while you can and get over there and see what's actually happening on the ground. It will change your life.
There is one October 13th through 23rd as well. So
There is. Okay.
yeah.
And then just to underline what Mercy said earlier, we PCI team, we're developing a template for this kind of thing too. So we're hoping to do end of June, early July, a tour next year. So if you're here on this call, give us your email so we can remain in contact, and we'll send you all information.
We're going to go deep. It's going to be a trip that will really help you learn and see and learn from the peacemakers on the ground, regardless of where they're coming from. We're going to hear from a diversity of strong voices.
Peter, I have a quote I'd love to read at some point when it's appropriate.
I see a question here from
Yeah.
Donna. What about resources to share with church and small
Well,
group?
I was going to add our church Quest is going to host a learning series, and we're kicking it off by watching Where Olive Trees Weep. And Andy and I watched that together a couple weeks ago, and it really does provide personal stories from Palestinians. There's also some other great documentaries that we're going to include in that series, like Israelism and Born in Gaza. There's so many resources, and sometimes at a church you can, kick something off with a documentary and have discussion afterwards. It's a good way to start a conversation. That's not an easy thing to start.
Yeah.
And
And
it won't fire the pastor.
right.
That's a series.
Network of Evangelicals for the Middle East, we're just getting ready to launch sometime in the next month or so a curriculum that's designed specifically for churches. It's called Ascent to Jerusalem, Pilgrimage, Politics, and Peacemaking in the Holy Land. And it's very even-handed. It's, gentle for people who don't know anything but want to begin to learn. And it leads people along in a very beautiful way. So we're really excited about that. And it's designed for churches, like I said, Sunday schools, small groups, things like that. So keep your eye out for that.
And if you're not very patient and you're just ready to explode and need some cathartic things, go to vigils, connect with Palestinian movements, connect with the university campus near you. That biggest thing that Palestinians say that they're encouraged is when they see university students doing what they're doing, and it's not the violence that the media portrays. But yeah, sometimes it's like, okay, some of these educational things, you just got to get out there and get it out of your system, because we keep learning and not being able to do it. I think it's damaging our psyche and our.
All right. Thank you all. We are at time for 31. I don't want to keep people longer than they were planning on a Sunday afternoon or evening. All of our peace builders are excited to keep talking about this and diving into it, and they are doing advocacy collectively for PCI as well. So if you want to talk more or learn more, feel free to ask, either email PCI with questions or you can email them directly. Yeah, we're excited to dive into this. I put the link for Peace Catalyst International Week of Peace Building if you want to see what else we've been doing, or if you would like to support us as we continue this work. If you know either one of these four or an individual peace builder and you want to support them directly, please go and donate to them. Become a monthly donor, help them do their work. You are also welcome to become a donor for Peace Catalyst as a whole. We also are doing the collective effort. So if you know someone, do that. If not, we welcome your resources wherever you choose to contribute them. And I think to wrap us up, I will pass it over to Andy to close us.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for listening. So there's a lot of allies in this place, and Shane Claiborne is an important one for us. So the Book of Common Prayer, he says this, it's a beautiful quote. Peace is not just about the absence of conflict, it's also about the presence of justice. Martin Luther King Jr. even distinguished between the devil's peace and God's true peace. The counterfeit peace exists when people are pacified or distracted or so beat up and tired of fighting that all seems calm. But true peace does not exist until there is justice, restoration, forgiveness. Peacemaking doesn't mean passivity. It is an act of interrupting injustice without mirroring injustice, the act of disarming evil without destroying the evildoer, the act of finding a third way that is neither fight nor flight, but the careful, arduous pursuit of reconciliation and justice. It is about a revolution of love that is big enough to set both the oppressed and the oppressors free. Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for joining us.